Hi everybody. This is a bit of an impromptu video. Um, I don't normally go into these kind of things on my channel. I mean, I have talked about politics before, but it was only usually in relation to a big event coming up like last year regarding the referendum. But there's something I just want to talk about briefly that's going on at the moment. As I'm sure the majority of you are aware, there's been a few terrorist attacks recently in Britain. There was one last week in Manchester, and on Saturday evening there was one in London, and previously we'd had one outside the Houses of Parliament as well. And there's something that this government is very keen on doing. It seems to be sort of one of Theresa May's pet projects, and that is internet regulation. And they seem to be using it as these terrible events as an excuse to push forward with it, saying that that these events might have been prevented if the internet was fully monitored and locked down. And personally, I think that's a very dangerous idea. The internet was intended to be for the free exchange of information, regardless of whether or not the governments of the day wanted that information to be shared or agreed with the perspectives of the people that were saying it. We often hear news reports from China about their very surveillance heavy internet, and they have the Great Firewall of China, which blocks them out from accessing large parts of the internet. And in China, if you Google Tiananmen Square incident, which was something that happened a few decades ago, I think it was in the 1980s, when students protested against the communist government, and the government responded by sending in the army, and several people were killed. Now, yeah. So if you're in China and you try to search on Google or Baidu or whatever other internet search engine over there for Tiananmen Square incident, you get no results. The Chinese government does not allow the Chinese people to know about the Tiananmen Square incident, and that's an example of internet regulation. Governments controlling what people are allowed to view online. Well, one of the things that has been, mentioned a lot by the Conservative government is porn filtering. A few years ago, it was set up so that by default, ISPs had to block porn in the name of protecting the children. And if you wanted to access porn, you had to actually either log into your ISP's control panel on their website and enable unfiltered internet, or in some cases you actually had to call them up and say you wanted it, which I imagine could be a bit embarrassing for some people. Now, of course, that's a fairly inert thing. Cause really, it should have been opt-in as opposed to opt-out. But well, it was easy to disable, and it's not really a problem. But the government basically wants to make sort of like a separate internet for Britain, if you like, sort of like almost, akin to the Great Firewall of China, walled off from the rest of the internet, where there's no porn, and they monitor what's going on and restrict access to information. Now, with the so-called Snoopers Charter, mass surveillance has become a reality, and we are in the Western world. Britain is the most surveilled state online. Just as in America, the NSA is basically mass data farming everything that goes on, be it internet records, phone records, so on and so forth. And the problem I have with this is it's like almost as if the government is automatically suspecting you of a crime and is hunting for data that or evidence that could possibly be prosecutable, which is basically just assuming that everyone in the country is a criminal, basically. And it was the in more stringent internet regulation was the big part of the Prime Minister's speech on Sunday morning after the incident at London Bridge. Now, this is something that's sort of been bandied back and forth over the last few years, but like I said, it seems that the government is using these terrorist attacks as an excuse to push forward with it. They seem to think that controlling the internet will mean that these things can't happen. And of course, anybody who knows anything about the internet and the way these groups operate is they use things like Tor and encrypted instant messenger clients on their computers and smartphones and so on. So regulating the internet isn't going to have any effect on that at all. It's just going to it's basically screwing over everyone in the country just for a few bad eggs who won't even be encumbered by these new regulations and restrictions. I mentioned it to my mother and brother on yesterday, because it's Monday today, and they both think it's a good idea. I tried to explain why it was a bad thing, but they don't seem to understand the precedent it sets or the dangers inherent with what it allows the government to do. My mother actually said, if you've got nothing to hide, then you've got nothing to fear. Now, this is the problem with this mindset is, like I said, the government essentially automatically suspects you of a crime and then hunts for evidence to prove it. Now, it starts with monitoring. It starts with porn restriction, and over time, bit by bit, our freedoms will be eroded and we'll be left with an internet akin to, the early days of AOL, which, a walled garden with only the content that the government of the day deems appropriate for us. And of course, this will all change depending on what government is in power. If these laws are passed and the government gets control over the internet and they regulate it, the likes of Jeremy Corbyn might say, this is abhorrent and, the government should do it. But at the end of the day, when the Labour Party gets into power, unless they have someone in charge who really opposes it and pledges to stop it, then they're just going to take advantage of it themselves for their own ends, because, they don't. It's like they don't lose any popularity points for using a system that's already in place. then the Conservatives are the ones that are going to lose the popularity points for implementing it. So it's a Labour government would have free use of it without any kickback from the population in the polls. There's been a lot of talk in America about net neutrality and the sort of things that ISPs can and can't do. Whether they like, the ISPs want to regulate the speed of the internet based on the website or the service you're using. So, for example, you buy a basic internet package from your ISP, and what they want to implement in the States is that basic internet package includes full speed access to sites like Facebook, YouTube, Google, Wikipedia, etc. And then if you want other services, for example, whether it be Twitter, Netflix, Hulu, Spotify, that sort of things, you have to pay for a higher priced package. Otherwise, you get reduced speeds. I mean, as it is, Netflix already pays ISPs in America as a guarantee that they won't reduce their speeds for their customers. And it's bad enough, companies wanted to do that thing, but for them, at least in that case, it's about money, them wanting to price gouge their customers as much as they can. Whereas when it's governments doing it, it becomes about, morality and politics and trying to keep a population ignorant of certain things that by rights they should be aware of and would affect their voting choices or their opinions on important matters. Now, maintaining internet neutrality and a free and open internet is something that I'm quite keen on because I'm a techie, as everyone knows. I use the internet extensively. I know a lot about the internet. And I know how it works. I know how important it can be, and also how dangerous it can be. Because these days even though we have access to more information, studies have shown that actually our scope of information has narrowed for the majority of people, because even though they have access to all of this information, they only look for the information that they want. So they're not exposed to the wide range of information that they would have been in the days of traditional media like newspapers and television news and so on, which presented lots of different things that they would have been not necessarily forced to consume. But these days, you follow various news sources on Facebook. People will only follow the sources of news and information that they want to follow, whether it be professional news outlets such as the BBC, Sky News in America, CNN, Fox, MSNBC, Bloomberg, what have you, or the amateur news outlets. I'm saying amateur, but a lot of them, they are on the professional level these days, despite not actually being real journalists. You have, the likes of Alex Jones, Milo Yiannopoulos, Jon Stewart, Colbert et al. So people are only getting the news and information that they want. So as I said, even though the internet gives us access to a much broader spectrum of information, in a lot of cases, what people actually consume and absorb is narrower than they have done in the past. So making sure that there is a free and open internet is important, because if you have a regulated internet like the Conservatives want, it will only be government approved sources of information and news. And because the likes of the BBC, it's a state owned institution, and a lot of people say that the BBC is biased, and basically, whoever is in power at the time, be it Labour or Conservatives, the BBC is slightly biased towards them. And, well, to be honest, that's perfectly understandable, because, like I said, it's a state owned institution, and it's the de facto unofficial government mouthpiece in a way. I mean, not to the degree that state-owned, news institutions are in, places like Africa and the Middle East, China, Russia, etc., but to a much lesser degree. So if all of a sudden, you're only allowed access to government-approved sources of news, then the news that you're going to get is only the news that the government wants you to get. I mean, as it is these days, even now, the mainstream media doesn't report on certain things that I've known about. You see none of it in newspapers or on news. I don't see. I follow the BBC on Twitter and Facebook and so on, and I don't see these things come up. But these are things that I've heard from other places. For example, Reddit, or other politics and news groups that I follow on Facebook and so on. So it's sort of happening to a lesser degree as at the moment, but that would only get more overt in the event of the government getting these regulations that they want. And of course, because we have a general election coming up soon, this is basically, if the Tories win the majority they want, this is going to be their mandate for implementing this. And at the moment, I mean, I've always voted Conservative in every general election that I have voted for, and that's because my political ideology is, I've taken the political spectrum tests, and I'm slightly right of centre, slightly towards authoritarian, in the area that's known as progressives, and so there is I agree with policies from both sides, and I mean, at the end of the day, with my studies of politics and everything, one of the reasons why I vote Conservatives is because they're more fiscally responsible than Labour. I mean, generally the tradition in this country is people vote in Labour. They spend a lot, they borrow a lot. There'll be big public works projects. The size of the welfare state is expanded. The previous Labour administration put in orders for 2 new super carriers for the Navy, which the Tory government wanted to scrap, but they worked out that the penalty clauses for cancelling the contracts was higher than the cost of actually completing them. So that's the only reason why we've got them now. And then the economy, the government runs out of money, the economy's in the shitter, and then people vote in Conservatives to sort it out. I mean, when the last Labour administration left office, and the new Chancellor of the Exchequer, who is basically the guy who's responsible for military policy in this country, when he got to his office, he found a note on his desk from the outgoing Labour Chancellor of the Exchequer that said, Dear Mr. Chancellor, terribly sorry there's no money left. Good luck. And, that's kind of... Basically, that's Labour in a nutshell. You know, the country votes Tory when they want fiscal responsibility, and then they vote Labour when they get tired of fiscal responsibility because of austerity and budget cuts and all of that, and they want the gravy train to start rolling again. There are policies of Labour and Jeremy Corbyn that I do agree with. I want nationalised railways, I want nationalised utilities, and so on and so forth, which the Conservatives are very opposed to. But yeah, and right now I'm seriously debating whether or not I can stomach voting Conservative anymore because of this stuff that's going on with internet regulation. The problem is I don't know if I could stomach voting for Corbyn either. See, on moral principle, I can't vote for someone who would put the sovereignty of our overseas territories on the table when they have consistently and overwhelmingly voted to maintain the status quo. Like the Falklands in the South Atlantic and Gibraltar on the southern tip of Spain. Whenever there has been a referendum on whether they want to, have sovereignty transferred to the nation that claims them. In the case of the Falklands, it's Argentina, and Gibraltar, it's Spain. They have voted 99.99% to remain a British possession. And as far as I'm concerned, that's set in stone. They can't. The government cannot go against their wishes. They have a right to self-determination under the UN Charter of Decolonisation, and Spain and the Falklands governments may bash on about the UN resolution saying that empires have to decolonise and return their possessions to the people who claim them, but they conveniently ignore the people's right to self-determination. And they've said time and again that they want to remain a British possession. However, Corbyn hates empire. He hates colonialism, and basically he wants to get rid of our colonial possessions, to the point where he would actually, I'm worried that he would ignore the express wishes of the people in order to pursue this misguided ideology. But like I said, some of his policies are very tempting, and I agree with them. And the ever-increasing internet regulation that Theresa May wants is something that I cannot conscionably support. So either I vote for somebody who, effectively doesn't believe in the right to self-determination, or I vote for somebody who doesn't believe in the right to having a free and open internet. And I'm going to have to do a lot of soul searching over the next week, because the general election is on the 8th, which is on Thursday, and it's Monday now, so I haven't got a lot of time to do it. Up until recently, we're talking up until a few days ago, I was planning to vote Conservative, and I've seen a lot of reports of a consistent fall in Conservative support regarding polls, but polls are notoriously inaccurate. They said the same thing before the last general election, and the Conservatives increased their majority. And I was thinking, up until a few days ago, Yeah, the Conservatives are probably going to win again. You know that they may well increase their majority, and that's a good thing because we need a strong negotiating hand when we're negotiating for Brexit. And you know, Labour getting in, whether it be as a majority or minority government with some sort of power sharing or um, coalition agreement with other parties, particularly the fucking SNP up north, because you know they've said Labour have said that they would consider that. Uh, See, I'm not looking forward to the prospect of that because, you know, in order to agree to a power sharing agreement, the SNP would demand another independence referendum for Scotland, despite the fact that support for independence in Scotland has dropped far below what it was last time they had a referendum, and they lost then. There's just going to be an expensive and painful exercise in vanity for the SNP. It's just going to cause confusion for the negotiations, and the the EU might seize that opportunity to, you know, either convince the Labour government to go back on Brexit or give us a bum deal. Whereas, you know, Theresa May has negotiated with Europe for years. She knows how to talk to them, she knows how to negotiate with them, and I'm convinced that she could get us a decent deal. But I'm not willing to sacrifice the internet for us to get a decent deal out of Brexit. You know, it's not, that's not an acceptable outcome for me. So, yeah. A lot of soul searching is going to have to be done over the next few days to decide whether or not I can still vote for the Conservatives, or whether I'm confident enough that Corbyn won't sell the Falklanders and the Gibraltarians down the river. And of course, also, you know, on a personal note, if the Conservatives are pushing for more people to be gotten off of disability benefits and into work, whereas the a Labour government would as you know has pledged to stop that. You know, and in the past, it would have been a lot easier for me to get unemployment support allowance under the previous Labour administration than it was under the Tories. But you know, I don't feel comfortable voting selfishly against what I think is best for the country. You know, that might sound weird, but you know, I try to be selfless in my actions. You know, when there's a big picture to consider. So yeah. Hmm. Kind of a dilemma at the moment, but you know we'll see what happens. I mean, the Conservatives are probably going to win, and I'm in what's known as a safe seat. Um, the Conservatives have held this constituency that I live in since before the current constituency was formed. It's been solidly Conservative since the 1700s. So, so whatever I vote for, it's going to be a Tory in this seat. So it doesn't really matter, I guess. Uh, so yeah, bit of a personal and ethical dilemma here. So yeah, a lot of thinking, a lot of contemplating, a lot of soul searching. Anyway, thanks for listening to me ramble. Be seeing you.